Welcome to the fourth in a series of online interviews with Richard Harvey. My name is Rob Meager, and today's interview will discuss the lecture, Awakening the Heart Nature, the Flowering of Self-Nature, and the Surrender of Compassion and Authenticity, Part 1 of 2. Today's interview and lecture was given online. The lecture was given online, originally on June 26, 2013. And it is available in written form in Moksha Dawn, an ebook you can order at the Sacred Attention Therapy website at www.sacredattentiontherapy.com/books. And you can also listen to the full recording of many of these lectures at www.sacredattentiontherapy.com/education. And now a little bit about Richard Harvey himself. Richard is a psycho-spiritual psychotherapist and spiritual teacher. His work emerged out of the human potential movement of the 1970s. He trained with many teachers in humanistic and transpersonal approaches. He is the founder of Sacred Attention Therapy, a radical new approach to inner work for the 21st century that proposes a three-stage model of human awakening. Richard is the author of Your Essential Self and The Flight of Consciousness, among many other publications. He works with people all around the world, and his forthcoming book is entitled Your Sacred Calling. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Richard to the call. Greetings.
Howdy.
We're back again.
We are indeed.
for another wonderful interview on another wonderful lecture. And I was rereading some of the material I want to cover with you, and there's, as always, again, there's just way too much to cover in one interview. So I might even propose, we'll see how things go and how things flow, but I might even propose that we come back to this lecture given the breadth of the material. But we'll see how it flows. I do know one thing, I do want to take my time because there's just some wonderful material to share and discuss. You opened the lecture, the very beginning of it, with an interesting statement. And it goes like this. You first welcome people to this unique occasion today. And then you go on and say, there is no time other than this present moment. And there is no progression of spiritual attainment that leads to enlightenment. I'll repeat that last part. There is no progression of spiritual attainment that leads to enlightenment. These words may not be encouraging words to some. But I've thought about them, and I've thought, is what you're trying to share, in part, is that we already are enlightened, we're already there, and there's nothing we need to do to achieve it. Have I intuited the teaching? Have I read too much into it? Are you trying to say something else with that opening comment?
I do understand the fairly popular idea that we're already enlightened and therefore, in a sense, anything goes, or devil may care, or whatever. But I'm not sure I've ever found it all that useful myself. Although I was introduced to it in the 70s, I think, and we all would sit around saying, oh, we're enlightened anyway, seemed to be a kind of excuse for license in a lot of ways. But no, that's not really what I think I'm saying at the beginning of this lecture. What I'm saying is there's no progression of spiritual attainment toward enlightenment because you actually won't be present when it happens. And because spiritual attainment exists outside of time. Mm. And what I find curious, and ever more curious, is it's almost as if this message is there and hidden. It's not hard to find. It's not hard to find even in modern spiritual teachings and commentators. It's not hard to find. It's certainly not hard to find from the ancients. After all, we can read the ancients today more than ever, just on the click of a button. And yet somehow this idea doesn't quite settle in. And even, just to complicate the issue, some modern day so-called spiritual teachers appear to refute it. But the reality is, and we're not mentioning names here, but famous people who are teaching spiritually. But the way it actually works is that you are dying. You are seeking to die. You are putting an end to yourself if you are spiritually inclined in earnest, seriously and truly. Then you are devoted to God, and your discipline, if it's truly spiritual, is devoted to your annihilation in surrender to the divine. And what that means is you entirely defer to the divine. And what that means is the absolute comes like a tidal wave and removes the field of relativity in effect, or should we say illuminates the field of relativity, because there's nothing wrong with this place. There's nothing wrong with this world that we appear to be in. It's just that when it's brightened, when it's illuminated, when it's shot through with divinity, then you see it as it really is. And at that point, eternity appears in whatever miraculous way it appears in space and time. And at that point, the whole perspective of progression and seeking and cumulative spiritual practice and all this kind of thing is entirely shifted away. It was never a cumulative exercise, in fact. It was rather a realignment of yourself in reality or in the eternal.
You've spoken in that initial sharing what's spoken of so often in many spiritual teachings, the idea of the annihilation of oneself, the death of oneself. And I know that has been a frightening concept to me in the past, until I realized for me what it's speaking about. And what it's speaking about is the letting go of the ego, the letting go of the layers, the letting go of the conditioning, the letting go of the scripts. And when you do that, the divine can come pouring in. So it's not the annihilation of life, it's actually the growing into life, and it's the celebration of life because of the letting go, the divesting of the layers, the scripts, the conditioning of the ego.
Yeah, because really everything is upside down. It's been said before, I've said it before, Alan Watts said it, it's been said by many people. When you enter into the inner realms, the inner exploration of the soul, the psyche, and the patterns, and the inward realities, everything gets turned about. So therefore, what appears to be me leading my life you sooner or you sooner or later see is me not leading my life. I mean, it's useful to turn everything round.
Yes.
And just do that as a rule of thumb and see what sense you could possibly make of it. So when I feel free, or when I feel like I can do what I want to do in the morning, eventually in psychospiritual work, I'm sure you get to this point where what you felt was free before is total enslavement, is bondage to the ego processes, it's repetitious, it's patterns based on survival, and as far as living your life goes, it's entirely limiting. It's this wonderful cartoon I think we may have evoked before of the guy in the box, and he's got another little guy in the box with him, and who has poked a hole with his finger, said, I think there might be something outside the box, and the other guy goes, no, let's just, let's not look, and let's cover that hole up quickly, we're happy in our box together. And in this marvelous cartoon, at the end, it pans out to this beautiful vista and this wonderful meadow and the sunshine and all of this, and there's this tiny little square, which is, of course, the box.
Yes.
With the people in it, the one who kind of wants to grow and the one who's conventional and compromising. And, you eventually wake up to that the conventional life, the unrebellious life, the unexamined life, isn't really living. And there's the stirrings of faith.
Shortly after that evocative opening, you share the following. The second stage of awakening is a rarity. I would like to say otherwise, but mostly we are struggling collectively to rise into the heart chakra, the energy beyond self and personality. There can be no rushing it, no faking it, and no substitute for genuine heart-filled life. You simply have to work your personality to death, so to speak. Now that last sentence, you simply have to work your personality to death, so to speak, is the only way to work your personality to death through inner work.
Well, we're loath to come up with absolutes here, but what I'd like to say is, I have my life, I have my decades of inner work. Most of the last nearly 40 years has been dedicated to this field, but in the broadest sense, on different sides of the world and different traditions and different approaches and psychologies and spiritual enlightening practices and all of this kind of thing. And I've very often been challenged, we all are in this kind of field, by people who think it's nonsense, and people think they got a better way, and people thinking hypnosis or shamanism or something is a shortcut or is better or whatever. And I've tried to be objective about the whole thing, and my view is, if there is another way, I don't know what it is. I just say that as nakedly and blatantly as I can. It's clear to me, I think it's clear to us all, there's exceptional beings. There are Ramana Maharshis, there's not many of them. But there are these guys who, they were 16 and they fell into some sort of death-like stupor and they attained enlightenment and they didn't move off the mountain or didn't leave their hometown or whatever. And these are wonderful events, inspiring events about our true self, and we can hold them like lights, like beacons. Most of the people we know are not like Ramana Maharshi or any of the saints or the sages or the great adepts. Therefore, we're inevitably faced with some kind of struggle, some kind of ordeal, some kind of challenge to reality, particularly in this culture and particularly in this time, which I would see, and many of us would agree, is a time of great ignorance or great darkness. Now, since that's the case, I mean, the quickest way, not the easiest necessarily, but the most authentic way through is what we speak. And I stumbled into psychospiritual psychotherapy. It could have been anything. I just did. I then rejected some other things that were, well, probably many things that were flying around at the time because they didn't appeal to my taste. But I wasn't informed, shall we say. I had no idea of the field, as it were. But my view, from my perspective of working with people constantly, talking to people and trying to understand the field as broadly as possible, is there's no substitute for intense, thorough, authentic work on the character and the personality, because they are the mask. They are what's between you and even beginning your spiritual work. Mm-hmm. And even yesterday, there was some conversation that implicated me, and that I read and on social media, and the lady said, "Well, therapy is no good because it's just mind conditioning." And I don't really disagree with her as a general sense, but certainly I disagree from my personal sense. Sacred attention therapy is striving to go beyond existing therapies by, for one thing, shedding the personality and the character and not introducing mind conditioning, but rather allowing and unfolding what is in the inner world of every human being that is unique. Mm-hmm. And that which is unique isn't merely the appearance of personality and character, which is charming or repelling or whatever it is. It's some inner view of truth, view of reality. It's for real. And it's hard work. It's challenging. And along the way, through the years, I thought, well, there must be another way. And really, does therapy work? And is it any good? And my conclusion is, not only can it be very good, it is essential for everyone who wants to wake up, with some exceptions.
Yes.
With some exceptions.
I find it very interesting what you shared, because I'm reminded of the teaching of the need in this time for, quote, a multifaceted curriculum. And what I mean by that, and similar to the experience you just shared from a dear soul on social media, I too recently had, maybe it was the same person, we should compare notes, recently had a dear soul on social media respond actually quite politely and as gently as they could to say, in effect, and I'm paraphrasing greatly, that, you know, sacred attention therapy is not the way I see it. I see it, you know, over here. I'm over here, and this is the approach I've taken. And my response was one of, you know, first thanking them for taking the time and the energy to look into the sacred attention therapy, but that, you know, no one therapy is for everyone, as much as we might like to think. You know, that even sacred attention therapy is the way it is. It's not gonna work for everyone. And that the approach that this dear soul was offering, that's going to work for some people. And that's why it's so great that it's there. And that I think there's a place for all of these different approaches, because they're going to speak to some people, and other people will have an opportunity to, in effect, return to the heart of God through the various approaches that are out there. And at the core, regardless of what you call it, whether you call it psychotherapy in the traditional sense, whether you call it sacred attention therapy, whether you're using shamanism or other modalities, I think at the essence, the core, all therapy is about removing the blockage to truth, regardless of the form that it takes. And I'm just glad that there are the different forms, because it will allow all of us to be able to return to that heart of God by removing the blockages to the truth of who we are.
It was an interesting conversation I stumbled on a Gurdjieffian website this last week, and it was the lady there who I think runs a website, referred to this notion of individual souls that are realized or incarnated in some individual spiritual form, and something which she called, I think she called it a pool of souls. And what it meant was some souls would attain in some ways spiritually, and then would have a challenge in death, or of course beyond death, after death really. Whereas the other ones would kind of fall into a pool of collective soul, not having attained in some higher spiritual fashion. And I thought that was interesting. It's interesting because, not because of a hierarchy or because of a sort of judgment or a way of making tiers of spiritual attainment, but just to understand something of what you're saying, which is not all approaches are right for everyone, of course, and there needs to be all these different approaches to enable people to open and to begin, in some cases, to remove blockages to truth. Maybe it's something we should think about with sacred tension therapy, which is to say that it is a higher level of attainment, because to get into the second stage of awakening is high enough, but to be able to talk about the other stages is enormous, to be able to talk about the whole gamut of development of the human being.
I've heard it said that the longest journey we will take in our lifetime is a journey of about 18 inches from our head to our heart. Now, near the beginning of the lecture, you speak of needing, quote, to ascend in consciousness to a new center, out of the animalistic lower energy concerns to the heart center. So, whereas the teaching that I'm familiar with says the longest journey is about 18 inches from our head to our heart, what you're sharing, again, out of the animalistic lower energy concerns to the heart center, so very much a chakra-driven approach. Are both these teachings talking about the same thing? The ideas from the head to the heart, and then the using the chakra system.
Yeah, I love the 18 inches. It's a great great analogy. Yeah, I think it is, because the way I would describe it is, if the heart is the horizon, the energy system above the horizon reflexes or reflects in the ocean of the lower chakras. And what this means is, firstly, it reflects the ancient wisdom, as above, so below. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, because with the teaching of the energy system, we've had there's been such a lot of books. I mean, some of the first original books from the East, often from Western adepts, I forget the name of Colonel someone or other who wrote the first book on the chakra system. These were very almost academic and very good and somewhat antiquated, but rather than look at these old texts on the chakras, even Patanjali and the rest of them, that consider it as a present day experience. What do I experience and where do I experience on an emotional, energetic, feeling level? How do I respond to the world? What happens around the heart? What happens around the solar plexus? When I'm working with people in therapy who are working on issues of self-esteem and self-image, for example, it's 100%. I mean, it always amazes me, the intelligence of their intuition when, and they may know nothing about energy systems, chakra systems, or whatever, and you say something like, well, where do you feel that? Put your hand there. Don't think about it, just put your hand there. They go like this. They put their hand here, which is, I'm putting my hand here on this solar plexus.
Yes.
Solar plexus in the chakra system is the
Yes.
center of relationship to self.
Yeah.
And this is the place. And when people say something like, if they've been cheated on their relationship or their marriage, or there's been some offense to their selfness, and they say something like, it felt like a kick in the stomach. I felt like I'd been thumped in the stomach or something like this. Sometimes they mean the guts, which is slightly different, but very often they'll do the same thing because it's an assault on themselves, and they may not even know the solar plexus from yoga or what's going on there, or the pulsation in the solar plexus and its energetic meanings. So what I try to do is impart the energy system as a direct experience, because I think without that it's just academic. And then what you find is, and this is getting back to the lecture, I'm talking about the animalistic concerns, which really means literally the lower chakras.
Yes.
To do with sexuality, to do with tribal identity, to do with survival and, home and material security and blah, 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 all those things. But you see, it reflects, as below, so above now, it reflects up here. And what it means is, and you know this yourself, people are concerned mentally with strategies to avoid poverty, to strategies to get material things they want. They use this to get those things. They're concerned, they get a headache about it, all about this. They're thinking about sex or materialism or money or power or jobs or employment or attainments or ambitions or something like this. It means that these higher chakras or energy systems are contained within the animalistic concerns, just the same as down here in the field of action and will, we go get. Right. We go get them here because we plan it up here. And of course, it's what you do in time is you open this up to spiritual vision, which is entirely different matter, to the materialistic relative world, fear-based, fear-driven vision. So that's what can happen when this isn't affecting, of course, the whole system is polluted by desire and fear. When you are impelled only by the lower chakras or the animalistic concerns.
I liked the analogy of, the heart level or the heart center being the horizon, and as above, so below, and this cycle of energy that rotates among all those regions. Approaching halfway, or maybe not halfway into the lecture, you share a heart and a gut-wrenching story, and I'm going to prepare. I'm going to read a little bit of it, and I'm going to prepare our listeners and our viewers for this, because I remember the first time I heard it. It was like someone was driving a spike through my heart, and each time I read it, I still get shivers. But keeping in mind, the focus of the lecture being awakening the heart nature, the flower of self nature, and the surrender of compassion and authenticity, I'll share this story. It's a couple of paragraphs. Years ago, when I was about 19, I had a shocking experience that would inform me in my life for years to come. I was walking through the streets of a seaside town in England when I came across two young men cruelly assaulting a third youth in the entrance to a cinema. They rained blows with their fists and feet over the hunched-up, crumpled body of the poor boy who lay on the ground. While he flinched and whimpered, I could hear the sickening sounds of their blows on skin and bone. It was horrendous and profoundly terrifying. I was not used to physical fights and even less to callousness and bullying. But the truly awful thing was that I knew with absolute certainty what was the right thing to do, and I could not do it. I couldn't wade up those steps to the brightly lit cinema entrance to intervene, to at least attempt to stop it, because I feared I would wind up lying on the floor like the poor victim. A crowd had gathered and all assumed the role of onlookers. To our everlasting shame, none of us, individually or collectively, stepped forward to do the right thing. We were all cowards, and I can say for myself that this was an event I found very hard to forgive myself for. This cowardly evasion of integrity and morality lay dormant in a bed of deep shame in my psyche for a long time afterward, reminding me of my fear and frailty, my selfishness, and my weakness. And I wanted to ask, are emotions such as shame, like that which you described in your story, what closes our hearts down? Is it what shuts us off from a life of compassion?
I think that, broadly speaking, emotional repression shuts the heart down. It's the reason that therapy seems to be obsessed with the releasing of emotions or the contacting of emotions and so on. Because that's the machinations of shutting the heart down when we're very young. And I think that the significance of shame, along with guilt and grief, is that they seem to constitute a deeper layer, perhaps the deepest layer, perhaps the very deepest layer. Anybody in therapy can get in touch with some repressed feeling, some emotions they've held on to for a while. But shame, grief, guilt, I've known held on for years, even by people who were doing therapy, who didn't know or had any idea that they were resisting or suppressing or avoiding the issues around it, or that it was inhabiting the very depths of their psyche. And usually it's convoluted, by the way. I mean, this story, which I find very affecting, even to hear you reading it, is a kind of direct shame in a way. I mean, I'm a young man. I could have been more physical. I could have been tougher. I could have just said the hell to that anyway. This isn't all right. I remember really feeling that, I was helpless. I was disempowered. But I mean, I could have been courageous, or maybe somebody else could have been courageous, and I could have joined. We could have changed that. We could have done something about that. There were far more people looking on than there were participating in the heinous act. But it's a direct shame, if you will. There's no unclarity about it. The kind of shame and guilt and grief I'm talking about that's held deeply down in the unconscious is usually convoluted. It's usually, there's a twist in it, It's a kind of knot of some sort. For example, it may obviously, very reasonably, logically be somebody else's shame, for example. It's not even your shame, but you've carried it. Mm-hmm. It can be an act of abuse in early life, or repeated acts of abuse in early life. For example, where you've taken the shame on in the act itself. So it's inevitably got a kind of, it's somehow twisted, it's corrupted, it's not clear. And the more knotted and twisted it is, the deeper it seems to have to be sunk down. Because when you just open it up, it's kind of, well, it wasn't you, was it? I mean, it was obviously him, it was obviously her, it was obviously this, that, and the other. I mean, there's no logic in it. This is the surviving intolerable circumstances, as we all do to some extent in childhood, in whatever experiences we suffer. And so, no, I wouldn't say shame is what shuts the heart down, but it's one of them, and it's a big one.
The story you shared and that I recited, one could say it's an extreme case, and I was reminded with the potential for extreme teaching and learning, and I was reminded recently, so eloquently, by a student in one of my discussion groups of how, because often in the discussion groups there's extreme situations that come up, and she said, these extreme situations are good because they really rub our nose in it. The teaching, and on this question that's embedded in the story, and you talk about, no one jumped in to help out this person. You didn't, others. And what's right in those situations? And I often recount this story, and I find myself giggling when I tell this story, so bear with me often. I was paying a visit to someone in the hospital, and I was leaving the hospital, and it was the 6th or 7th floor of this building, and the elevator doors were closing, and this man came along in a wheelchair, and he had a cast on the leg that was extended, that was elevated, and I stopped the elevator doors from closing so that he could get in. He tried to get in, but there was a lip between the floor and the elevator, landing, and so he was having a hard time rolling himself in, and he tried a few times, and finally I got out of the elevator and I helped him in. And he made a gentle comment, like he said, "This is my first day driving this thing." And I just laughed, and I said, "What floor are you going down to?" He says, "The main floor." So I pushed the button, the doors closed, and on the way down, I said, "Would you like me to help you get out of the elevator?" Because he had driven himself in and he couldn't turn himself around because it was a small elevator and he would have needed to back himself out. He said, "Yes, thank you." So finally we got down to the main floor, doors opened, I stepped in behind him and I rolled him out. And then I began to roll him down the corridor. There was only one way to go, and I said, "Do you need any more help?" He says, "No, I'm fine from here." So I thought, okay, fine, and I watched him roll off. And it was fairly crowded, so I quickly lost sight of him. And I thought about it as I was leaving the hospital. I thought, it would seem like I helped someone in need. But, quite often, and it's not uncommon, actually, patients in hospitals try and break out. So, did I just help someone escape? Or, the point is it looks like we're helping, or it looks like we're not helping, but are we actually not doing the person a favor by helping them, or are we actually doing them a favor by not helping them? Like it's an interesting question to ask. Now, in your extreme case, in the story, it would appear, well, of course, you were supposed to jump in. Everyone was supposed to jump in and stop this thing. But would that really have been helping? It's an interesting question, I find, is healthy to ask when we find ourselves when our nose is rubbed in these situations, and what is helping? And of course there's the whole dialogue around what's help and what's service. But what's the right thing to do in those situations? It's
sometime, but not now. I'll tell you the story my wife tells. When she was younger, my wife Nikki helped a caterpillar who was trying to cross a busy road, and the caterpillar, in fact, once she delivered it to the other side of the road, it seems didn't want to go in that general direction. And I think you can imagine the rest. But it rather brings up the issues that you're talking about.
Yeah. As I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, because our blessed time is already up, there is plenty left to discuss in just this part one, and I might suggest that when we come together again, we pick up, in effect, from where we left off and continue discussing this lecture, because there's still some beautiful material in this, but we can discuss this, and rest assured, we'll be back for another wonderful time together in this interview series. So thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Until next time.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.